to begin, people? Where to begin? Hello, everyone. Yes, there's a lot of, it's almost like a road trip. Okay. There's a lot of moving around. Back. Ooh, I have been having quite the summer. I hope you guys are having a nice summer. It's been quite the summer for me. I hurt my back. Oh my god, it hurts so much. I decided that I wanted to try a summer sport, and so I signed up for dragon boat racing. I wouldn't say I signed up for the racing portion of the dragon rowing. I signed up for the social fit category, and it was way more intense than I expected it to be. I don't know if this is a sign of how out of shape I am or of just the fact that it's really intense, and I should have realized. But I really hurt my back as a result of one practice. So suffice it to say, I'm not going to be returning, and I feel a little bit sad about that. But to console myself, I've been reading. That said, I realized that I did not finish off my wrap-up, and I think my wrap-up is in fact incorrect. I'll go back and look at the wrap-up, the books that I wrapped up for. I said that my wrap-up was for April, May, June, but I think that the ones that I discuss, and for sure the ones I'm going to talk about today, I read in May and June, so I don't know. I'm really confused now. As per usual, as per my modus operandi. My regular normal state is that of confusion. Okay, well, shall we get to the books? I think we shall. Oh wait, I don't have my notes with me. I don't know, I feel safer with my notes. Oh, you guys, I've been drinking kombucha. I discovered kombucha. I know I'm late to all the parties, but here's this kombucha. Yum. This is not a sponsored thing, but this is the kombucha I've been drinking. This flavor is kiwi pineapple. And there's another flavor that I really like. It's watermelon mint. And this is a Montreal company, Ruiz. It's called Brewed in Montreal, Quebec. So yeah, my new favorite. So good. I know I can make it myself. I know everyone's gonna be like, oh, you can make it yourself and save so much money. But you know what? I'm just not that kind of girl. To the books. To the books. To the books. So I'm going to talk about a couple of books today that made an impression on me in May and June, and then hopefully I'll be all caught up and I can get back on track with a regular monthly wrap up that actually reflects the books that I read in that month. I can always try. I can give it a shot. So the first book that I want to talk about is E.M. Forster's A Room with a View, and just look at the pretty cover. I know people show how much they like covers. This is so pretty though. I feel like if I was a painter, this is how I would paint. This was such a fun read. E.M. Forster is a classics writer. And I wasn't sure if I should start with A Room with a View or Howard's End. These are kind of the two that I was choosing between, but I really like the premise of this for a summer read, even though I did actually read it in June. So I really like the idea of this for a summer read because it's about a woman who goes on vacation in Italy. She's English, and she goes on vacation in Italy, and it's about what happens to her when they go on this vacation. It was written in he wrote this in 1908, and I think it's a pretty hilarious look at the English abroad. It tells a really good story, in this case a love story, also provides a social commentary. So the summary, and just to give you the kind of the basic plot line of the story, is that this young woman, Lucy Honeychurch, goes abroad to Italy with her cousin Charlotte, who's basically like her chaperone, and she's very English, very kind of prudish. The title of the book comes from a reference to when they're first there in Italy and they're staying in this pension, and they don't have a room that has a nice view. And so they are kind of complaining about that. And this gentleman, this other English gentleman named Mr. Emerson, who's also in Italy with his son George, offer up their room, which has a view to Lucy and Charlotte. And that is where the title comes from. So what happens in Italy, how the English behave abroad is kind of a topic of the book. It's very witty. This book is very well written. It's very entertaining, the writing style. I laughed a lot, and I really, really enjoyed the writing style. But basically what happens is that here in Italy, Lucy and George kind of have, I guess, a flirtation, although he's not very good at writing like romantic vibes. I don't know, maybe that's because, I don't know why that would be, if it was just the time that it was written. I don't know. I know that he was gay, so maybe that, I don't know, could that be part of it? That could maybe be part of it. Anyhow, so there seems to be like this flirtation, or you think, okay, young male character, young female character, what's going to happen here? Are they going to fall in love? They kind of have like a couple of conversations, and one in a church in Italy, and then the book takes us back to England. And what we learn is that Lucy is actually engaged to be married to this other character named Cecil, and Lucy comes from kind of a middle-class suburban background, what would be now suburban background, and Cecil is a very upper-class British, I wouldn't say elite, but definitely upper middle class, therefore a catch from the perspective of society. And this is where E.M. Forster gets his digs in, or his commentary in, or his criticism in of society and the expectations of women in society at that time, and social class, meaning women need, like, it was aspirational to marry above your social class for someone like Lucy. But of course there's a love triangle because of George and Lucy's kind of flirtation with George, or the implication that there's a romance between the two of them. Which, again, it's kind of an implication because it's not really, it's not hot and steamy or anything. So I think that's probably the downfall of the book, is that it's not, he didn't really write the love story between the two of them as being particularly passionate. It's very subdued and very suppressed. But maybe that was intentional because of the times, or because of British culture. I'm not sure exactly. So he kind of makes fun of English and English culture, especially when he writes about English culture abroad. Obviously, like, the culture in Italy is a very different culture than culture in England. And so, you know, the question is, okay, is this setting the reason for her flirtation with this other character, George? I think it could have been a lot spicier if it was an Italian character. It wasn't. It was an English character, and somebody who was also of a same class. So less appealing from a societal perspective. So needless to say that Lucy does go ahead and pursues George. But I think the commentary probably is more about her and her desire to, like, give the proverbial finger to the tradition of doing what she's supposed to do in marrying Cecil. It so happened that Lucy, who found daily life rather chaotic, entered a more solid world when she opened a piano. She was then no longer either deferential or patronizing, no longer either a rebel or a slave. So I just thought that was a very revealing paragraph about Lucy, and about the position that women were in at that time, that they're really the only choice is between being either a rebel. If she's a rebel, she's going to pursue the romantic relationship with George. And if she's a slave, then she's pursuing the marriage with Cecil, this upper class character. So, I mean, he's an excellent writer, really, really good writer. And really enjoy this book. I would recommend it. I would highly recommend it. I'm not sure if it's the place to start with E.M. Forster. I know that it's like one of the most popular books, and I really want to watch the movie, which I had seen before, but I think I want to watch it again now, just because I'm curious. I'm sure the romance between Lucy and George is more steamy in the movie, I would imagine, than it is in the book. So yeah, I'd pick it up if you can, or let me know if you've read it and what you thought of it, or if you have read any other of M. Forster's books. I thought it was really interesting. I did a little bit of research before filming this video about that novel, and apparently he started it in 1902, and that's when he wrote the section of the novel that takes place in Italy, and then he went back to it later on, and that might explain kind of why, because it was weird reading it, because in the first part you're kind of engaged in this whole story of what's happening in Italy and what's going to happen in Italy, and then all of a sudden we're back in England. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought we were going to have a romance in Italy. So it was a little, like, I found that a little bit jarring, and I think it really did show. And when I went back and discovered that was what how he had approached the writing, it kind of showed. So I thought that was really interesting. So maybe not his best. Pretty fun and very summery vibe read nonetheless. So the next book that I want to talk about is The Italian by Ann Radcliffe. This book was gifted to me at Christmas time, and it did take me a while to get through The Italian, just because it's a classic and it was written in 1797, and it's quite, it's really, really good. I'm going to be saying so much positive stuff about this book, but there are parts in the book where it does drag, especially near the end. I'll get to that in a minute. What really helped me with this, and I don't often do this, or I hadn't been in the habit of doing it, but I've been starting to do it a little bit more when a book is kind of just, I feel like it's heavy and I'm not sure I really want to read it. I really want to get through it, and the plot was moving along really well in this book, but I just needed a little, I don't know, I needed like a little help being immersed in the book, because I wasn't escaping into the book. So I listened to the audiobook for around page 200. I started to kind of feel like the weight of it, because I knew I had 200 more pages to go, and I was like, oh, just the weight of this book. So I started listening to the audiobook, and the audiobook is so good. A woman who reads it, but she's great. She puts on different voices for the different characters, and it really helped me to get more into the characters of the book. And I have to say that I really, really, looking back, I'm so pleased that I stuck with it, and I'm so pleased that I read it. There is a section near the end of the book which is about a trial, and she does kind of, I do think she gets lost in the weeds a bit there when she's writing about the trial of one of the characters. But let me just explain the plot first. So The Italian is it's a love story about a young man named Vivaldi, and he's from a very wealthy upper class family, and he falls for this young girl, Elena, and Elena's mother has recently died. Elena, who's of a lower class, and his mom, the Marchesa, she's referred to as the Marchesa in the book, is really against their romantic relationship, and so she decides that she needs to do something about Elena to get rid of her. Basically, she's quite an evil character, and she needs to figure out a way to get this woman out of her son's life. And then it gets really dark, because the way that she gets rid of Elena is to confide in this character, Father Haudenosaunee, who is a religious character who then is the architect of Elena's kidnapping. And yeah, so that's kind of the premise of the book. So Elena gets kidnapped, she gets taken to a monastery, and then she even gets kidnapped again because Vivaldi goes to try and save her from the monastery. Like, Vivaldi's love is undying, and he goes to save her from the monastery, and it just is kind of this constant pursuit of Elena by these two evil characters, the Marchesa and this really evil, scary character of Father Haudenosaunee, who, and the reason that he's so scary is because of the link to religion. That's why it's so scary, because that's supposed to be those are supposed to be the good guys, right? The church is supposed to be the good, they're supposed to be the good people. The ones that you turn to when you're in trouble, and the ones that save your soul and all that stuff. So it is a really good, like, I wouldn't say horror, but thriller. She's really, really good at writing suspenseful a suspenseful plot that keeps you guessing and keeps you wondering and kind of keeps you on your toes. But that being said, she does get very weighed down in the language. Oh, yeah. Okay, so... So wait, did I get the plot clear there? Let's just review. So Vivaldi, the son of the noble family, falls in love with Elena, who's not of a noble heritage, and his mother, the Marchesa, decides that she has to get rid of Elena. And so she engages this monk, Father Haudenosaunee, to do her dirty work and kidnap Elena. And I guess ultimately the point is just that, what are they supposed to do with this kidnapped girl? Like, ultimately, it comes to the point in the story where she doesn't want to, like, command him or direct him to kill her, but that's ultimately what she wants. So she wants Elena to be dead. But so they have this really interesting conversation where Haudenosaunee and the Marchesa are talking about what to do about Elena, and like she wants to say kill her, and he's sort of like, well, what choice do you have? You have to kill her. And they have this really funny kind of cat and mouse conversation about what to do about Elena, but neither one of them kind of has the balls to actually kill Elena. So it's really interesting. There's even a scene where she is almost killed, spoiler alert, and he just can't bring himself to. So Ann Radcliffe writes, while he was yet unable to baffle the new emotion by evil passions, he despised that which conquered him. And shall the weakness of a girl, said he, subdue the resolution of a man? Shall the view of her transient sufferings unnerve my firm heart and compel me to renounce the lofty plans I have so ardently, so laboriously imagined, at the very instant when they are changing into realities? Am I awake? Is one spark of the fire which has so long smoldered within my bosom and consumed my peace alive, or am I tame and abject as my fortunes? Ha! As my fortunes, shall the spirit of my family yield forever to circumstances? The question rouses it, and I feel its energy revive within me. So this is the kind of writing that we have here. It's really, really, really good. What's really funny about this printing and that passage I just read, I don't know, I'm going to hold it up so you can see, but I don't know if you guys can see, but look, almost every sentence has like an exclamation after it and a question mark after it, and there's like a lot of punctuation. Which is part of the reason why it's a little bit laborious to get through this book. But anyway, it's still really, really, really worth it. How beautifully she writes about the scenery and the vegetation and the landscape. So this is at one point where Vivaldi and Elena have escaped at one point. There's a lot of twists and turns in the plot here. So they've escaped at one point, and then it's just describing like a lot of the story takes place in the countryside, like as they're moving from one monastery to another town to all over the country. So here she writes, the only practicable path leading to the base of the mountain, however, was now occupied by these devotees, and to mingle with them was little less than certain destruction. A bright moonlight shewed distinctly every figure that moved in the scene, and the fugitives kept within the shadow of the walls, till, warned by an approaching footstep, they crossed to the feet of the cliffs that rose beyond some palmy hillocks on the right, whose dusky recesses promised a temporary shelter. As they passed with silent steps along the winding rocks, the tranquility of the landscape below afforded an affecting contrast with the tumult and alarm of their minds. Like, this is how she writes. It's wonderful. It's really, really beautiful writing, and a really good balance between describing the landscape and describing the psychological situation that the characters are in, which I thought was really special. In terms of the plot of the book, I don't want to give too much of this away, but there are a lot of characters that are misunderstood, we don't know as well as we think we know for the first half of the book, and then a lot of it gets revealed in the second half of the book, and that is fun and interesting. Not exactly maybe believable, but I thought it was really interesting, and the two evil characters are pretty great. I've heard that the Marchesa is sort of like, there's a lot of references to Shakespeare. I found that the first half of the book really gave me like Romeo and Juliet kind of vibes, because there's a lot of Vivaldi serenading Elena, and just it gave me that kind of a feeling, at least for the first 100 pages or so, for all of the action of the the plot kind of started to gain steam. And then I've heard the Marquesa being compared to Lady Macbeth, and she does start almost all of her chapters with quotes from Shakespeare. So she's obviously very heavily influenced by Shakespeare. And so I thought that was really interesting. It makes me want to go back and read Macbeth because I'm not super familiar with Macbeth, so it made me want to go back and read some more Shakespeare. Julius Caesar as well. So there's a couple of different Shakespearean plays that she quotes from, which I think is really interesting and probably draws from those characters and those stories for this story. So yeah, it was work. It was work, but I've really grown to really appreciate this writer, and I really want to read some more of her work. And I do think that the audiobook really helped me along with this one. Apparently it's a response to another book called The Monk, which I'm not familiar with. I don't know if anybody has read any Ann Radcliffe, or if anybody knows about the Monk, which is another kind of thriller, horror, gothic novel. And it's interesting that the way that and the other one's called The Monk, and this one, the main character is Father. He's referred to as Father Haudenosaunee. And just how evil, the evil characters are the characters that are part of the church. That heavy criticism of religion is really interesting to be reading about. And yeah, I really recommend it. It was really good. But it's a time commitment for sure. So make sure that you set aside some time if you want to go ahead and dig into Ann Radcliffe. I don't know what I'm going to say about this next book. What can I say about this next book? You know, I didn't hate it. It's never a good sign. I didn't hate it. The next book I'm going to talk about is Exciting Times by Dolan. Dolan is an Irish writer, and I was really excited to read this book because it had a lot of hype and it was longlisted for the Women's Prize. I don't know. I stuck with this book, and I'm glad that I stuck with this book. There were a couple of moments where I considered DNFing it, but I really don't DNF a book lightly. I don't know why I had trouble with this book. I don't know. I think it's possible that I just could not relate to the main character really at all. A lot of people are talking about how this is, a millennial fiction. And in my head, I'm just like, if this is a representation of millennial fiction, I don't know how I would feel about being a millennial and being represented by this. The plot of this book is, the story of this book is about their main character, Eva, who's 22 and moves to Hong Kong from Dublin, where she goes to teach English. That, of course, is a lot of people's experience. I'm not sure about so much Hong Kong. I know people who moved to Korea to teach English in the 90s. So that's definitely not a millennial experience. That's absolutely an experience that lots of people have had from English-speaking countries. I think the commentary about language and about colonialism, and it's a bit subtle in this book. I think she could have done more with it. It's not very... There's not a big commitment to it, or I'm missing something. It could be that I'm missing something, but it feels like she wants to make this kind of commentary in the book. You know, the character being an English teacher and teaching English to Chinese kids is an important commentary, and yeah, I don't know if was explored as much as it could have been. The story really doesn't focus on that. That's the thing. Like, it's kind of a back or side story. Or if there's a correlation that is supposed to be being made, I think I'm missing it. But anyway, Eva goes to Hong Kong. She's Irish. And I guess, there's the relationship between the Irish and the English, and then I guess the colonized that are also being taught proper English, and that she is from Dublin and she's teaching proper English to Chinese kids. Clearly there's a commentary happening here. But and also there are these conversations that she has with her mother and her family back home where they talk a lot about language. But I think some of it is a little bit, I don't understand it because I'm not Irish. So I think it just kind of went over my head a little bit. It's kind of a shame because I was interested in that part of the book. I'm always more interested in the social commentary. And then the rest of the story is about this girl, Eva, and her relationship with these two other people, which forms a love triangle. She's in a relationship with this older I think he's only slightly older. I don't think he's like a really old guy, but this older guy named Julian, who's a banker and quite wealthy and who buys a lot of stuff for her. And it does seem like their relationship is kind of transactional rather than really emotional. And then she meets a young woman, a Hong Kong native named Edith, who she kind of falls for, and their relationship is much more emotional. It's a love triangle, but with characters who she has very, very, very different relationships with. And there's a lot of questioning of why would she be in the relationship with Julian unless she's just using him for his money. This is kind of weird. Like, why are you in relationships? Because it's convenient, because it's transactional, because you have to be. It means, I think, that this character Ava is kind of not a very likable character. I mean, she has a job. She doesn't have to be, in this relationship with this banker guy. And I don't know, maybe she's trying to figure out who she is. I think there might have been a parallel implied between language being kind of unnecessarily confusing or complex and not really for any good reason, and the character Ava being unnecessarily confusing and complex in terms of these relationships that she's having, and not necessarily for any clear reason. And I think that rung fairly true, and maybe that is like supposed to be a truly millennial experience, but quite honestly, that's a human experience. So I don't understand this labeling of like millennial fiction, how millennials experience is so different, because I didn't really read anything in this novel that felt very different to me from experiences for people from other generations. Possibly the fact that being queer is more acceptable, for sure. Like, that's something that a lot of people of older generations did not get to explore openly and experience as openly. So I think that is something that's different. And I guess also like things like, these little vignettes where she talks about stalking Edith on Instagram and that sort of thing, and like people being able to see what you're doing online. I guess that is more relatable for millennials. But I mean, aside from that, the crux of the story, a story about a girl who is trying to figure herself out at a young age, is a pretty relatable story for people of all generations. So in that way, I thought it had so much potential, but I don't know what it was. It was just something about the way that it was written that wasn't very... It didn't have as much reflection as I would have hoped that it had, or it wasn't as developed maybe as it could have been. It felt super fluffy at times, and not necessarily like in a fun way. It was like in a kind of, it felt superficial, I guess is the better way to describe it. And I hope that that's not a commentary on millennials, because I don't think that they're necessarily that superficial, but maybe that was the point. I haven't read any of Sally Rooney's books. They're on my TBRs. I guess I need to read Sally Rooney, because apparently Sally Rooney was a mentor for Dolan. So yeah, I thought the characters were pretty shallow, and I thought it probably really misrepresented millennials, or I thought that I would give it the benefit of the doubt of give millennials the benefit of the doubt and allow them to be misrepresented here, because I think I would be pretty upset if I was being represented by the character in this book. I don't know. I'm still a little unsure about how I feel about it, because in the end I didn't DNF it and I did read the whole thing, and I did think it was worth reading, and I'm still confused about how I feel about this book. I think that probably says everything you need to know. So yeah, that was kind of a weird review, but yeah, I don't know. Not sure. I know there's people who really, really love this book, and I know there's people who really hate it. I'm definitely falling somewhere in the middle. I think that the premise was really interesting, and I think that she could have done more with it. So I think it's a debut novel, so maybe the thing is that more good stuff is coming. We can hope, right? The Awasawa Murders by Riku Onda. This is a Japanese book, and it was translated by Alison Watt. And I enjoyed this book. At least I enjoyed it in the beginning. This book is a mystery, and it's the style of the mystery, the way that it's written is sort of like a true crime, in that it's a mystery about a crime that happened in the 1970s, and the story is told through the writing of another book, and the woman who is writing another book who is somehow affiliated with the family. The murders that took place at a party. So a really wealthy family, a doctor, I believe, they throw a party, and 17 people are murdered because they are poisoned through the drinks that they have at the party. And so the story is told through interviews or old taped interviews and that this author did for her book. And I thought that was a really interesting concept. And I thought that the idea of this murder itself and that many people being murdered by one person at one time, really a massacre, was kind of intriguing. And yeah, it really captured my imagination. But and there's more to the story. There is one survivor who is was a 7-year-old girl at the time, and she's blind. And there's some question about, could she have done it? And there's another suspect that the police believe did it. I think who commits suicide. He does commit suicide. And so there's some question about whether he did it. There's a note found at the... So you're supposed to kind of try to figure it out and put all these puzzle pieces together. I would say it's like a mystery, true crime, puzzle, atmospheric mystery. And the only thing that I disliked about it is the ending. Well, I just found it really difficult because it was like, I really do want to find out what happens. And it's not the kind of book that gives you closure in revealing what happens. So that pissed me off. And I know that there are people that are totally fine with that. It's artistic and they appreciate the art of the novel, but I'd like to know what happens. Even with true crime, like when there's a true crime story that you don't know what happens, it's so frustrating. Like you just go down this rabbit hole. I remember a couple years back, I was introduced to the Maura Murray. I don't know if you guys are into true crime at all, but Missing Maura Murray podcast. Thanks to a friend of mine. Whew. That is one serious mystery. It's like a mystery within a mystery, and there is no answer. And man, is that tough, because there are people still obsessed with that particular true crime story who still don't have any resolution. So yeah, this book does not bring a lot of resolution, just to warn you. I thought it was had some commentary throughout about particularly memory, this idea that we're trying to piece together the mystery here and try to solve this mystery or solve this crime on the part of the police inspector based on the memories of other people, and the memories of other people are inherently unreliable. So there was a lot of that kind of commentary. However, there was also a lot written about the weather, which I found a little odd. I don't know if it was to create atmosphere or if it was something in the translation, but there's a lot of reference to like how muggy the weather is and how hot it is in the summer. And everybody seems to be able to agree on the weather and what the weather was like, but they have a hard time remembering other details about that night. I don't know if that's telling us something about how people selectively remember different things. Like obviously the memory about what the weather was like is not necessarily controversial. But yeah, so that was the Awasawa murders. I was a little disappointed. I was really excited to read it. It wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be. So if you like ambiguity, that's a book for you. Ambiguous endings, and you are good to go. Okay, so I have 2 more books that I'm going to talk about, and these 2 books are like, I don't know, tricky. So I'm going to get myself some kombucha. I'll be back. Where do I start? I've read all these books that were kind of heavy, like misogynist books. I read something like light and fun. And so I picked up The House in the Cerulean Sea. It was also the book club, the late night book club pick for June, I believe. Although I don't think they ever had a discussion about it. So it would have been really interesting to have seen what would have happened if they had had a discussion about it. And my bad if they did have a discussion. So yeah, everything on the internet says that The House in the Cerulean Sea is this wonderful feel-good book. It's like wearing a warm blanket or getting a big hug. And I was like, okay, that sounds good. The premise of the story is that there is the main character, Linus, like a social worker the equivalent of what would be today a social worker working for a government organization that inspects orphanages to make sure that the children in these orphanages are being well cared for, children in the foster system are being well cared for. So he's like a caseworker, he's like a social worker. And he gets an assignment to go to an orphanage, and this sort of presented as a magical place on the ocean continually gets kind of compared to a postcard, like wish you were here or don't you wish you were here. So a lot of the story is kind of about this character Linus, and he's a bit of a pencil pusher in his job, and he takes a lot of pride in that, but is that all there is to life? And a lot of it is about his path to living a better life or getting more out of life. So that's one part of the story. He's also a queer character, and there's also a love story, which is also very feel good, and I think that was a really lovely part of the story. So he goes to investigate this orphanage that he's tasked to go investigate, which is this orphanage that has really the weirdest of the weirdest magical youth, the kinds of creatures that are just really unusual in the world, and they're not your normal unusual creatures are just a little bit of magic. Kids who are real outcasts, who wouldn't necessarily be able to function in normal society or wouldn't be accepted by normal society. At least that's the implication. A lot of these kids have been rejected. The reality is that they are wonderful, and they all have wonderful qualities, and they're all misunderstood, and it's kind of a plea to stop judging people. And however, while I was researching this book, I came across an interview with the author where he said that he was inspired by or took some inspiration for the book from the 60s Scoop. And when I read that, I started to feel so uncomfortable, especially because here in Canada in the last 2 months, we've had a series of discoveries of mass. Okay, well, I should back it up. So the 60s Scoop is a part of Canadian history, a very difficult and sort of shameful part of Canadian history that involves the systematic removal by the government of Indigenous children from their communities, from their families, literally separating kids from their families and placing them in these residential schools. And it's like the saddest, most horrific thing ever. It's so upsetting. So I'm Canadian. So it's, it's horrible. And then I live in my life knowing that I live my life based on this horrendous treatment of Indigenous people by white people, by my governments, by my culture, for whatever entire time I've been alive. And anyway, I'm kind of getting off track, but my point is just that the idea that you could take something as serious as that and use it as the basis of something really feel good and really whimsical is just extremely problematic to begin with not a lot of at all reflection on that very serious, difficult, horrendous part of Canadian history. It's just sort of weird. I read the book without knowing that, and I found out about it afterwards when I was kind of doing research to do my comments about the book. I did feel really strange about the book. I knew it was a feel-good book, and I was like, well, maybe it's just me, because there was just some stuff in here that was tricky from the get-go. Just the whole idea of, it's a very white savior kind of approach. We as a society have decided that these people don't belong in society. We've isolated them. We put them on this island in this orphanage. The system has done this. And yes, Linus comes around to realize that that's not okay and that these kids don't deserve that, and et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, like, the whole premise of the story is based on this. I just don't think it's really appropriate to write a whimsical fantasy book based on such a serious and such a painful and such a horrible part of Canadian history that we have not even begun to deal with. Over the last couple of months, as I was about to say, you know, we've found out about mass graves at residential school sites of children. So children who died at these residential schools, we don't know how they died. We don't know if it was just because of neglect, or if it was because of disease, or if it was because of abuse. We don't know anything about what happened in these residential schools. And of course, you can just imagine what did happen in these residential schools. And these schools were run by our government. Oh my God, even just the fact that they existed is horrendous. So it's like this idea of, like, if you're going to take some inspiration from something like that, you need to think really long and hard about why you're writing a book with that as inspiration. That isn't a serious book, you know? There are Indigenous people in Canada who are hurting, and who, like, it's still such a significant part of present day social problem. Like, it's a huge problem in our society in Canada today, because Indigenous people make up a majority of kids in foster homes. Suicide rates amongst Indigenous youth are extremely high. Indigenous people are discriminated against all the time. Majority of homeless people are Indigenous. Like, I live in Montreal, and, you know, we just recently had a case of Joyce Echuan, who was in the hospital, who was mistreated and ended up dying because of the fact that she was an Indigenous woman, which nobody would even know about if she hadn't recorded it on her phone. So I know that I'm kind of ranting here, and I know that the messages were well intended for this book, but it's just, it's super upsetting. So I don't recommend this book. Can't recommend this book. So that was heavy. I didn't know it was going to be that heavy. I thought I would just be like, oh, this was a book that I kind of thought was just okay. Anyway, so certainly can't recommend it. Very sorry. I guess just knowing that was the inspiration for the book really overshadows any of the good things about the book for me. It's like I just can't get over that. Might be unpopular, but these things need to be said. And just to counter, I would say there are many, many, many books about the Indigenous experience that people should read. The most important one would be 21 Things about the Indian Act, or 21 Things You Didn't Know About the Indian Act, which I think everybody should read. The Inconvenient Indian, which is the other one that I've read, which is also excellent. Yeah, if you're not reading books by Indigenous authors about their Indigenous experience and you live in Canada, you really need to start. I need to read more. I think I'm going to make it a priority for myself in the second half of this year. I will link the interview with TJ Klune below. The last book that I'm going to talk about is The Shadow of the Wind. Super popular on YouTube. A lot of people's favorite book of all time. And I can understand that to some extent, because I think the premise was really great. The story is about a young boy, I think he's about 10 years old, and he's grieving the death of his mother. And in order to inspire him, his dad takes him to the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. That is this secret place where you find a book, or a book finds you, that you're supposed to protect for the rest of your life. And Daniel, the protagonist in the story, discovers a book called The Shadow of the Wind by an author who is very mysterious. Daniel comes to discover that most of his books have been burned. He mysteriously disappeared. It starts to kind of track down the mystery around why these books are being burned and why this author has disappeared, and that is the sort of the basic plot line that gets followed. But I didn't like this book. I had a lot of problems with this book. I did like some of the characters. I really liked the evil character, but there were also so many problems with this book. Oh, the other thing I really liked about this book is the atmosphere, and I really love Barcelona. I've been there 4 times, and I thought that, you know, you could feel kind of the sense of being in Barcelona, and that was cool. But I mean, outside of that, I thought it was predictable. I knew exactly what was happening with the books and the author. I thought the twist that he did have in the story was not believable. I just had a lot of problems with this book, and I'm really shocked and surprised that it's so many people's favorite book. But most of all, the thing I'm just like the most about this book was just how anti-woman it was. Maybe that's supposed to be, oh, it was the 1940s, and that's how we talked about women, and that's how we thought about women, and that's how we treated women, I guess. I thought it was so bad. I really didn't like it. I forced myself to finish it. This was not a good, I don't recommend. So I'm going against the grain with those, like, for sure, when I read a book that is really misogynistic or really just has all of those negative things to say about women, unless it's like one character and there's, you know, that character is supposed to be a bad character, but when it's like all the characters in the book kind of treat women the same way, I just feel like, I don't know, it bums me out, and I don't feel like reading it anymore. Not only that, I also found it kind of boring, and I didn't think the story really went anywhere super interesting, and I wasn't really invested in trying to find out what happened. And the twists and turns I didn't find believable. So yeah, I really did trash that one, didn't I? I mean, I think I was just really disappointed because I thought it was supposed to be such a great story. So, can't win them all, right? So those are some of the books that I read in May and June. That is the second part of the wrap-up. You can see the first part of the wrap-up here. And I'm going to come back at you with a pretty fun book haul video because I have been collecting some pretty great reads coming up. And get your comments down in the comments below about how much you disagree with me on some of the points that I've made. Or if you agree with me, you can also mention that. If you like this video, you can give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like this video, meh, just keep it to yourself. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Bye. In the story, she writes beautifully. Oh, hi. You're on the video. Boom, boom, boom. I'm very excited. The missing Maury. Somebody goes with you to watch over you. What's the word for when somebody goes to watch over you? Like your, God, why is my phone not working today? Your, not companion, not confidant, your chaperone. Oh, Lordy, can you tell us the summer? No, this is just how I always am.